What's up, everybody? And welcome to another episode of Scouting the Fins right here on the Five Reasons Sports Network, also part of the 3 Yards Per Carry podcast feed. Just like this Miami Dolphins season has been an accident, you need to be ready too. After an accident, your first move should be calling 305-800-PAIN. Better Business Bureau credit with an A+ rating. Your car accident personal injury specialist. Fast connection with trusted doctors and attorneys. Always ready to take your call 24/7. Again, 305-800-PAIN, 305-800-PAIN. And as always, this show is brought to you by ThompsonCigar.com. Use promo code 3yards20 for 20% off your order of $75 or more. Once again, use promo code 3yards20 for 20% off your order of $75 or more at ThompsonCigar.com. Coach, you're on with me tonight, and a lot of developments after the Ravens game, and you were actually there, and it was just a very disappointing game overall. Chris Grier has finally been canned. Champ Kelly is the new general manager, and the Dolphins have traded Jalen Phillips to the Philadelphia Eagles for a 2026 third-round pick. A lot of developments from the trade deadline as well that could potentially impact the Miami Dolphins. We'll get all right into it.
Yeah, like you said, I was at the game. I'm a very optimistic fan, and I spent the day feeling like the Dolphins had a chance to come back. When in the end, it was clear that they were the much worse team that day, right? And this season, even they both had uh, 2 wins going into that, 1 win, 2 wins. Anyway, after that, right, you got the news of Chris Grier, then the news of Jalen Phillips. Felt like they were going to start to get the ball rolling to the full tank rebuild, whatever you want to call it, that a lot of fans did. And then we got to today, and there were some big moves today that we're going to discuss, but none of those really centered around the Dolphins. And some of those may have just been opportunities that fans wanted that weren't there. We don't know whether Champ Kelly was just sitting on his hands in the office, or whether he was actually trying to do stuff and just wasn't able to get what he was asking. But there was definitely some moves today that impact the Dolphins indirectly that we're going to discuss.
Yeah, I feel like what's going on with the Miami Dolphins with general manager Chris Grier being completely gone. Jalen Phillips being traded, and now Champ Kelly, former Bears and Raiders executive, stepping in as the interim general manager of a team that feels like it's quietly dismantling itself mid-season. It's not necessarily a rebuild. It's also not a teardown, but let's call it what it looks like. It's optimistically, coach, as you would say it, a strategic reevaluation of this organization and this roster. There's a lot of things that don't really necessarily lie. Let's start with the headline. Chris Grier is out, has been out for a couple days now. 8 years as the general manager, 16 years with the organization. Stephen Ross finally pulled the plug. What's telling isn't just when he was fired, which was mid-season, but why. Uh, this was not a reactionary decision by Stephen Ross, I think. This was building years to come, from drafting Tua to Austin Jackson to Noah Igbenogany, the whole fallout with Brian Flores, Tom Brady, the suspensions, the draft picks taken away, even Chris Grier's trades from Jalen Ramsey to Bradley Chubb, even Tyreek Hill. The cap was absolutely loaded with injury-ridden players. And, on the last podcast, Eric had said that his philosophy was, exploiting the market inefficiency of often injured players. I think the message was pretty clear. If the injured players aren't playing and the players that he picked aren't performing well, and the roster he built with Mike McDaniel, uh, Stephen Ross is not going to care who you are, how long you've been working with him. The results need to show. Chris Greer's blueprint was not sustainable.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, Chris Greer had quite the long runway with the 8 years. Stephen Ross sat up there on the podium and said that he was putting Chris Greer in charge of it. And Steve Ross was a very patient owner, and that can be a good thing. You don't necessarily want an owner that's making knee jerk reactions and changing stuff up every year. But at some point you have to pull the plug and you have to say that it's not working. I think that he gave Chris Greer more than enough rope to, essentially hang himself in the end with it. The like you said, the choices that he made, right? In there are there are opportunities to capitalize on the market there with some of those injured players, but when that seems to be the core philosophy of what you're chasing, that every move that you make is viewed as a bargain because the player has an injury history, not only in free agency, but also a lot of these guys that were drafted, and it requires quite a bit of luck that the Dolphins never had for that strategy to work out. Was never really a sustainable model to continue doing that. And it eventually came to a head, and Steve Ross put it out as far as he could. We were to the point that there was no way that something couldn't happen. When Brian Flores was fired, that one kind of came as a surprise, right? I think that there was some stuff in the background there, but it hadn't. You could have tried to push that one further. This one, you can't push any further than what they did. Um, I think that when you look at the timing of it, I think that the timing of it has to do with the ability to evaluate some of these younger players. And I did a take five on the Jalen Phillips one, and even when I was talking about the Chris Greer one, this is very much about trying to see what's left on the roster, right? What is worth keeping to build around. So I think that we're going to see, even though we didn't get the trades that we wanted today, I think we're still going to see some of that youth movement. The Jalen Phillips one really opening the door for Chop Robinson to be used in a very similar role, stuff like that. But yeah, I think that at this point there was nothing else that could happen with Chris Greer other than somebody had to fall somewhere, and that ended up being Chris Greer.
Yeah, and Champ Kelly is widely respected across the league. He's a scout known for people management, player development, and bridging front office and coaching communication. He was in Chicago, he was in Las Vegas. He helped implement some process driven evaluation models, albeit they were not successful. It was data blended with film, something that Miami continues to sorely lack in the organization, even with Chris Greer in the building. I think, Coach, you and I, for the last 3, 4 years, have seen a lot of the analytics with this offense, defense, and some of the players that they draft. And it's not necessarily fitting the mold of what a good, successful organization actually needs in terms of players on the offensive line, players on the defensive line, how personnel management should be, players that are assigned in free agency, and the type of plays, personnel that are potentially being run. His appointment, Champ Kelly's, could be more so about stability. It might be a test run for a full front office restructuring. Remember, Champ Kelly interviewed for several GM jobs in recent years with Carolina, Las Vegas, and Tennessee among them.
Yeah, I we'll see what happens with Champ Kelly. I my concern there is that just going from Chris Greer to Champ Kelly and not continuing the revamp of the front office is just not enough for me. To me, that feels like we're going to continue to try to do some of the same things. Um, Obviously, Mike McDaniel still has a chance to save his job. I think it was, Schefter and some of the other ones reported that right now they're saying that McDaniel is safe through the end of the year. We'll see if that is the case if they continue to lose. But as we get into future seasons, if the only change is to move to Champ Kelly, then I wonder how much influence that Champ Kelly would really have, because we've seen in the past where Mike McDaniel has kind of gone above Chris Greer in some scenarios. And Chris Greer, one of his biggest faults was that he catered too much to his head coaches. That whatever they wanted was kind of the direction that he went. Whereas I think that when you have that GM, when you have that guy that's put is the head of the rebuild, that guy needs to have some times where he comes out and says, "Look, this is who we're getting. This is who you need to coach, or this is who we're keeping. This is who we're letting go." And I don't think we had enough of that with Chris Greer. And I'm not sure that if the only move is to go to Champ Kelly, I'm not sure that we're going to get that guy in the GM position that has that weight to push around and say this is what we're going to do. Because I feel like if they continue with what they have and they bring Mike McDaniel back, that he is still going to have Stephen Ross's ear, and essentially the Champ Kelly would just be a de facto GM. And I'm not sure that Mike McDaniel has done anything to be in a Andy Reid or Bill Belichick type role where he should really have that say in personnel either.
Yeah, maybe Mike McDaniel has a bit too much power, or Mike McDaniel is more so in Stephen Ross's ear. We do know that Stephen Ross, quote unquote, loves Mike McDaniel. Stephen Ross has some pressure in potentially letting Mike McDaniel go. If he does end up leaving the Dolphins, if Stephen Ross does indeed fire him, he's going to be a hotshot offensive coordinator commodity come January, February, if he does indeed fire him. Not only that, you're letting one of the best offensive minds go. He could potentially get another NFL team's offense back into top 10 status and thrust himself back into a head coaching gig. We've seen it happen with Dan Campbell. We're seeing it happen with Ben Johnson. We're seeing it happen with Zach Taylor. A lot of these head coaches in the NFL, at least 25% in the NFL, were at some point working and being paid by Stephen Ross as coordinators or coaches for sure. So Mike McDaniel might be thinking, hey, maybe I really need to give this guy a chance. Maybe actually, maybe he can learn from his mistakes. Maybe he can potentially grow. And this comes to my point, coach, that I also put in our OnlyFins Discord, by the way, $4.99 a month for the patron chat. I put this in our premium vetted channel saying maybe it's not more so the pressure for Mike McDaniel to actually win with this team and with this roster, but more so the pressure to show that he can build a functional and competent offense with what he's got. Maybe he can grow the playbook a little bit more. Maybe he can grow into a leadership style role in terms of his coaching. We know Frank Smith is finally down on the sideline. They're communicating a little bit well. We've been very, very critical of Mike McDaniel. He sticks with his core philosophy. If he deviates from it and he works, he doesn't stick to it. He's very core in his philosophy. And we're going to dig into the numbers because the Dolphins' offensive decline has been very, very bad. Look, eighth in completion percentage, ninth in third down rate, 12th in red zone touchdown rate, but they're not getting there often into the red zone. They're not able to score points. They have turnovers, miscues, mishaps. Now, look, those rates and metrics on completion and third down and red zone, they sound strong. They sound like a top offense. But when you go deeper, you only have 6.47 yards per pass, 23rd in the NFL, 13.7% explosive pass rate, 26th in the NFL, and 34 explosive passes total, which is 22nd in the NFL. Okay, the offense may be a bit more efficient, but it's not dynamic. It's lost that edge that defined Mike McDaniel's scheme in 2023. You can point to play calling, which we have. You can also point to player execution, which also, coach, we've both talked about. But also, what about common sense? What about personnel usage? What about trying something different that has worked in the past?
Yeah, I think a lot of that goes back to the point that you made that it feels like Mike McDaniel has too much power. And I was talking to a buddy of mine who's an Eagles fan and said about, that I think it's time to move on from Mike McDaniel. And he's like, yeah, I'd love to have Mike McDaniel as an offensive coordinator. And, I brought up his reluctance to change and the way that he goes back to some of his old habits as soon as things start to get tough. And he pointed out that as an offensive coordinator, you're going to have somebody above him that can kind of, I don't want to say push him around a little bit, right? But when you get into a couple of those series where you're moving away from the run, and then your head coach gets on the headset and says, "Hey, Mike, we need to run the ball this next series," right? Right now, there's nobody in the organization with Mike McDaniel being at the top of the food chain. There's there might be guys that are suggesting it, but there's nobody outside of Stephen Ross that can get on that headset and say, "Mike, we got to run the damn ball," right? Or we need to go to a different philosophy, right? That we are catering more to the talent that we have. Because Mike McDaniel, we all know he's a great X's and O's guy. I think that if he had, if you take the roster that he's supposed to have each year, I think he could put together a fantastic offense that's lighting up the scoreboard. But then as those pieces start to fall off, we don't see an adjustment to the players that are on the field, right? It comes down to that the adage Jimmys and Joes versus X's and O's, right? You can have all the X's and O's you want, but if the Jimmys and Joes you have on the field are not capable of that, well, then you need to adjust the X's and O's to do what your guys on the field can do, and haven't really felt that with Mike McDaniel. So I know that we'd all be wearing egg on our face, all of us that want to move on from Mike McDaniel, if he goes somewhere else and wins a Super Bowl as an offensive coordinator. But I don't know that he is ready to make that growth as a head coach and play caller at the same time. Like it feels like somebody that needs to go somewhere else, needs to have a little more oversight while he's calling these plays and learn more. Like we see this all the time where a coach flames out in his first stint as a head coach, goes somewhere else and grows, and then in his second term is a much better coach. And I think that's probably what we're going to end up seeing with Mike McDaniel. For me, the leadership qualities are not necessarily there. Um, he wants that player led locker room. We talked about that the last time that I was on here on Scouting the Fins about how you can't have that without kind of setting the direction. And I don't think the Dolphins have ever done that. And I don't know that you can really do that at this point because Mike McDaniel has been who he is here. And it's tough to change that. So, yeah, I think that there's certainly a scenario that he goes somewhere else and he's a great offensive coordinator. It looks awful for us, but I don't know that hanging on to him longer than we have is going to have that same result.
Yeah, there was something that Chris Kaufman posted in the OnlyFins Discord saying on scripted drives on the first or second series, the Dolphins' offense is world beaters, right? And as the game goes on, there becomes like this complete slope of deterioration as the game goes on, where instead of the offense being above average or world beaters, they become below average. They're ranking around the 20s in terms of yard per play, in terms of points scored, even in terms of rushing yards. Look, Mike McDaniel can be this great guy who's an amazing play designer, but it doesn't necessarily mean he's the best game planner or maybe even the best play caller. And if you're going to be an offensive guy, especially as a hotshot coordinator, which everyone thought he was in San Francisco, and you're also the head coach, you're not getting it done. You're going to lose a little bit of respect in the locker room. And coach, you said it. Look, he's earned the power, he's earned the respect of Stephen Ross. But at some point, even with the change of the organization, if this continues and Stephen Ross does not necessarily see a change in how the football team is playing and how they're preparing, I, I think this could be it for Mike McDaniel, even though Adam Schefter has said that he's safe till this season.
Yeah, we see that all the time where somebody, says that somebody is safe or they're not going to be replaced as a starter or a coach, whatever. And then, things continue to go south and your hand is forced. I don't think that Stephen Ross, I don't think wanted to make a midseason firing of Chris Greer. I think he wanted to let the season play out, see how it went, but it got to a point where you had to make a move. And if the Dolphins continue to lose games, if you know for now, Mike McDaniel still has a team playing hard, but now that Stephen Ross has made the Chris Greer move and made it clear that we are looking towards the future more than 2025, if those players start to kind of fall off in terms of the effort, the execution, the focus over the next few weeks, then you're going to reach a point with Mike McDaniel as well, where even though you want to keep him till the end of the season, that your hand could get forced with that as well.
Yeah, we'll talk about the plan for the Dolphins' future in a little bit and our opinions on the trade deadline that happened. But first, we are going to head to break and a word from our sponsors. Fall always feels like a reset between back to school, busier routines, and shorter days. Finding the time to cook can be tough. That's why I love Factor. Their chef prep, dietitian approved meals make it easy to stay on track and enjoy something comforting and delicious, no matter how hectic the season gets. More variety, more meals. Choose from a wider selection of weekly meal options, including premium seafood choices like salmon and shrimp at no extra cost. I think I might try the salmon and shrimp, maybe the blackened shrimp and the spicy chili salmon. I think that might actually taste pretty good. Support your wellness goals. Enjoy even more GLP-1 friendly meals and new Mediterranean diet options packed with protein and good for you fats. Savor global flavors. And for the first time, try Asian inspired meals with bold flavors influenced by China, Thailand, and more. From more choices to better nutrition, that's why 97% of customers say that Factor helped them live a healthier life. Feel the difference no matter your routine. I am a customer. Eat smart at factormeals.com/3yards50 off and use code 3yards50 off to get 50% off your first box. Plus, free breakfast for 1 year. Who does not love free breakfast? And yes, that's code 3yards50 off. That's number 50 at factormeals.com for 50% off your first box, plus free breakfast for 1 year. Get delicious, ready to eat meals delivered with Factor. Football season is in full swing, and Underdog is the best place to get in on all the action. Are you ready to get off the bench and into the game? Then head over to Underdog to get in on all the action. Whether you're into basketball, football, hockey, or any sport in between, Underdog is the best place to get in on all the action all season long. Playing on Underdog is easy. Just pick whether your favorite players will go higher or lower on stats like rushing yards, receptions, touchdowns, and more. Get your picks right, and you could win up to 5,000 times your cash. If you're following the Miami Heat, their offense looks absolutely fantastic. Looking at their next game, I'm looking at Norm Powell higher than 21 points. That's right. Book it. Norm Powell higher than 21 points. Download the app today. Sign up with promo code 3yards to score $100. That's right. $100 in bonus entries when you play your first $5. That's promo code 3yards. Underdog. Make picks, win money.
19 plus in Alabama and Nebraska, 19 plus in Colorado for some games, 21 plus in Arizona, Massachusetts, and Virginia, and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. See assets.underdogfantasy.com/web/play and get terms _DFS_.html for details. Offer not valid in Maryland, Michigan, New Jersey, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit ncpgambling.org. In New York, call the 24/7 Hope line at 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369.
All right, and we are back. Coach, we got to take a look at this future of the Miami Dolphins for 2026, 2027, and beyond. It was reported that the Miami Dolphins would be having, you could say, a fire sale before and right during the trade deadline. There were a lot of talks of certain Miami Dolphins players potentially being moved around. Jalen Phillips was moved for a third rounder. There were talks about Bradley Chubb, Rasul Douglas, Minka Fitzpatrick, even potentially Jalen Wright, and even Jalen Waddle, the Penguin. There were a lot of reported comp offers. The Dolphins were asking, not really asking, and they weren't offering Jalen Waddle. Other teams wanted Jalen Waddle, and the Dolphins were saying, okay, we're listening. We want a first round pick starting off and a little bit more. Maybe, a third rounder, fourth rounder for that same draft year or another high round, day 2 pick in 2027. And I think that scared teams a little bit because, as the NFL insiders reported, like Ian Rappaport and Tom Pelissaro, that they were sticking with their guns. They were sticking with the evaluations. And a lot of Dolphins fans weren't happy. But it leads me to believe, with the players that were involved in this, why was Jalen Phillips the player that was traded away instead of, say, Bradley Chubb, who brings no value to the Miami Dolphins next year or in 2027, especially with his contract? He's an aging player, aging veteran, hasn't necessarily been playing like he was before injury, but Jalen Phillips gets moved.
So on the Jalen Waddle thing, I think that was more of a, if you remember back when the Dolphins traded Laramie Tunsil and they got that King's ransom from the Texans, and those reports that Tunsil walked into the office to be told he was traded, saw what they got for him, and he's like, yeah, I'd have traded me for that too. So I think that was kind of the scenario with Waddle, where they weren't necessarily looking to move Jalen Waddle, but if somebody's going to come in with a exorbitant offer that you just can't refuse, right? You're going to at least listen to it. I don't know if they were ever expecting that to actually happen, or that they were, really pushing or negotiating. I feel like that was more of a, hey, if you're going to blow us out of the water with an offer, then we'll listen type of deal. But that's about as far as I think that one got. As far as Jalen Phillips versus Bradley Chubb, I think that comes down to Jalen Phillips was a much more attractive piece to another team. You're looking at a player who, from Philly's perspective, they're essentially getting him for a third round pick and paying him, I think, $1.5 million for the remainder of the season. And then, and this is a big if for Jalen Phillips, right? If he stays healthy for the rest of 2025, signs that big contract even somewhere else in place 2026, then the Eagles could still recoup a comp pick from that whole deal, maybe even as high as a third. And if they do that, then they look like geniuses. From the Dolphins' perspective with that one, I think that they kind of knew at this point that, especially with the uncertainty of what's happening with the coaching staff, that you don't want to get to the end of the season and have to offer another injury-riddled player a massive contract the way that they did with Tua, right? You go and you give Jalen Phillips a new contract, you're bringing in a new coaching staff potentially, and then he gets injured again, and that just becomes an excuse for the next coaching staff. So rather than creating an excuse for the next coaching staff, rather than or even hoping that he goes sign somewhere else and you get the comp pick in 2027, I think you trade him now, you get that third round pick for 2026, and you take a step towards making, if they're not going to stick with Champ Kelly, making this position more appealing, right? The more that you can stockpile those picks with the limitations they're going to have in spending and free agency in 2026, having more draft picks is a way that you make this a more attractive job for a GM. As far as Bradley Chubb, I think that just came down to, you know, I don't know that anybody wanted to give up anything for him, right? I mean, you described everything about him there, right? Jalen Phillips has been playing pretty well, right? But I wouldn't say that he's at a Pro Bowl level. And you're talking about Bradley Chubb playing, not even up to that level. So from an on-field performance, not as good of a player right now. And then when you look at the contract, where the Eagles could be free and clear of Jalen Phillips if they want to, there are still multiple years of control left on Bradley Chubb's contract where, over the next couple of years, he's got almost, $20 million base salary. So, if you've traded him to another team, then they would be staring down the barrel of doing something with that contract next year potentially. So I think that really, maybe you could have flipped him for a 6 or a 7. But again, maybe that's not what the Dolphins were looking for. Maybe they were saying, hey, we want a 5, and nobody was willing to go that high, and they just decided not to do it. I think that if Bradley Chubb can stay healthy, again, another big question mark there. I think that you could possibly have the same conversation in 2026 that you did in 2025 with him, where it felt like they essentially told him, look, you are on the cusp of getting cut, right? And we can cut you and you can go out there and you can find what you want in a contract. It's not going to be as big as what you have today, or we can restructure this, lower your base salary, and create incentives again where you have the potential to, earn a lot of that back. So I think that's still a conversation that you can have with Bradley Chubb next year. But in the end, I think that dealing Jalen Phillips, he was just a much more attractive player. I don't think they had any intentions of moving Waddle, and Chubb, I just don't think, had the appeal to other teams that Dolphins fans would like to say that anybody was really knocking on the door for him.
So look, you're gonna hate me for this, but this is what I'm calling a quote unquote functional tank job. I know you don't like the word tanking, coach. You don't say the word out loud, but the non moves that did not happen for the Dolphins on the trade deadline, they kind of say it for you. They're sticking to their philosophy, they're sticking to their guns, and now they're going to be evaluating their personnel. They're going to be thinking about 2026 cutting whatever cost they can to clear up their books. Right now, they're going to be under the salary cap by $25.9 million for 2026. They're going to try to reposition themselves for long-term cap health. They have, what is it, 8 picks in the draft in 2026. They have a first, a second, 3 threes, 4, 5, 6, and 7. 9 picks that they have in total. They could use some of those picks for trades for getting other younger players potentially, but then the entire question comes up: what do you do about Tua? Right, 2026 is a big hit year for his cap. If you do look to trade him, you could do the Denver method where you just eat the money, trade him, and draft a young quarterback. But that kind of defeats the purpose. You're making this young quarterback come into a team that doesn't necessarily have a core personnel. It has an offensive and defensive philosophy, but it doesn't have the culture for that quarterback to succeed. I mean, we saw an unsuccessful tank job for the Miami Dolphins, the 2019-2020 season. They tried their best. They had all these picks. They put all these money into, these free agent signings. Then they signed other guys who were injury prone to big contracts, and we're back at the same point we were in 2018 during the Ryan Tannehill years. So what are you going to do? You can stockpile these assets, play the assets game correctly, draft good football players who are not injured, or are you going to fall into the same thing with this organization, with this regime? This just kind of leads me to believe with Stephen Ross, he may not be up for another tank. And we talked about it in a couple episodes ago of the Ross ownership group. with his daughter and his son-in-law, Daniel Silman. Maybe they could be potentially in the process of advising Stephen Ross, hey, maybe we should do things a little bit differently, whether they extend Champ Kelly as their general manager or they look for someone else who has a better philosophy in mind, better strategic asset thinking, better salary cap management. There's so very few guys in the NFL that owners want to be salary cap guys because they can bring in their own salary cap guys. Heck, the Dolphins already have one with Brandon Short. They need someone to operate as the head or VP of football operations, kind of like a Nick Saban, who he was in college. He operated like a general manager, and he had amazing coaches that could do the job for him. Operated, ran the team without giving too much power to the head coach, in this case, Mike McDaniel.
Yeah, you like you said, I don't like to use the word, right? But you nailed it with the idea of a functional tank. And I think that was the clear direction as soon as Chris Greer was let go, right? That at that point was a clear indication that this team is moving from, hoping to rebound and make a playoff run to we know this season, we're finally admitting that this season is essentially over and we are going into a evaluation phase. Um, I think that's what we're going to get through the rest of this year. I think we're going to see more of these young guys playing bigger snaps so that they really can evaluate it and see what they're going to do going forward. And you talked about the strategy for rebuilding. And if you go back to the how this whole Chris Greer thing played out, there was never really a clear vision on that rebuild, right? You started out with the tank in 2019. You accumulated all those picks, and you can argue whether the picks were the right ones or not, right? Obviously, a lot of them weren't, but there was a strategy there of building through the draft, building those young players, and trying to create a core for that team under Brian Flores. And then Mike McDaniel arrives, and you see a complete shift in that philosophy where now they're shipping out draft picks for uh, Tyreek Hill, for Jalen Ramsey, for Bradley Chubb, right? And it became a, kind of a quick fix type thing that obviously failed as well, right? So I think that as we're heading into whatever this next version of the Dolphins is, it's going to be very important to have a clear direction of where you want to go. And I think that has to be through the draft, that you have to, this is a long-term thing, right? I don't think that we can sit here mid-season 2025 and feel like 2026 is going to look like a bounce back year. And maybe you can, right? You go back to the Tony Sperano days where they went from, was it 5-11 to 11-5 or something like that. Maybe you do catch lightning in a bottle a little bit there, but that probably should not be the expectation heading into next year. And when it comes to the whole Tua thing, right? Either you ride that out and you have him be a bridge quarterback, or you take the bad medicine now, you take the cap hit now, and you move on from it. But neither one of those is a hey, we're looking to really compete in 2026 strategy. It's more so, I guess in my mind, setting up for 2027. Whether it's hey, we're going to throw a young guy in the fire now and give him a little more leeway, or we're going to use Tua as a bridge quarterback and really set it up, to try to, maybe make a run for something more significant in 2027. But I think that, you just have to, whoever the new GM is, has to be able to set a clear vision of what we're going to do, right? Are we going to commit to drafting guys, building them up, and letting that be the core of the team? Or as soon as things start to get in motion, are we going to have another, F them picks episode and we start, trading and trying to bring in everybody else's dented cans?
Well, I think the build up and lead up to the 2026 and 2027 draft starts now, right after this Ravens game. They have Josh Allen and Buffalo coming to town. Then after that, you have a Marcus Mariota-led Washington Commanders in Madrid. Then you got the New Orleans Saints, who are doing a tank job of their own. Then you have the New York Jets, who shipped out Sauce Gardner for 2 first-round picks. You shipped out Quinton Williams for a first rounder and a second rounder as well. They were thinking about shipping out Brees Hall, but there's other teams who are in a quote unquote quiet take mode. Number one being a division rival in the AFC East with the New York Jets, who look like they're bending over for Fernando Mendoza and are in prime position to draft Jeremiah Smith in 2027. For this Dolphins 2026 draft, there's not a lot of quarterbacks at this moment right now. We haven't seen a lot of the championship games yet. We haven't seen a lot of the rivalries yet. The clear number one right now is Fernando Mendoza for quarterback. If you are going to bring in a quarterback to back up Tua Tagovailoa and have him be the bridge until 2027. There's not a quarterback I would take right now, albeit I'm a big fan of Dante Moore. I think he needs at least one more year of college to be masterful. He's got a lot of talent around him. And quarterbacks in the NFL, usually whatever college they were at, they are more successful in the NFL if they played with lesser talent. Because those quarterbacks at those small schools like Cincinnati with Brendan Sorsby, Joe Burrow, who is now with LSU in 2019, those guys learned how to play with not NFL caliber talent. But when they did, they elevated those guys even more. You can make that argument with Tua. He was already in a great system with Alabama. He had amazing NFL style players. You take a look at Tua's 2021 season, he didn't have that many fantastic players on his team. He made do with what he could, but you could argue and say he didn't necessarily elevate the team like Joe Burrow has done. That's what I see with Dante Moore right now. With other quarterbacks, I don't think anyone else is first round draft worthy or franchise worthy like a Lenora Sellers or a Taylon Green right at this moment. But that 2027 draft class has some potential with Arch Manning. Dante Moore could be coming out. You could see Lenora Sellers opt out transfer for a year or two, maybe like the Miami Hurricanes. They've been great at developing quarterbacks. You saw Cam Ward become a first rounder. Carson Beck's, even though he, stifles under pressure, looks pretty good. Outside of that, he could potentially transfer to the Miami Hurricanes. So you have more guys there. And even then, Nick Saban says, I think the best quarterback right now is Julian Sayin. He might even be in that 2027 quarterback draft class. So if the Dolphins want to move towards the future, they can't win that many games this season. And it could potentially call for Tua to not play well or potentially be benched and ride out this wave with Quinn Ewers or Zach Wilson. If you are really thinking about building the right way through the draft, whether it's with McDaniel and Tua or without McDaniel and Tua, you need to ensure that your assets are good for the draft and you get picks in the correct range for a certain type of blue chip players and prospects.
Yeah, I think that it's going to be difficult for the Dolphins to be bad enough for a top pick in 2025 when you look at the teams like the Saints and you said quiet tank. I don't think the Colts are being very quiet about the way that they're tanking.
Not the Colts, the Jets and the
Or
Saints.
Jets, yes, my bad.
Colts are like the best team in the NFL.
Right. Yeah, I was thinking about that because of the Sauce trade. But I think the Jets are being very, very obvious with the tank that they're doing, and I hate to give the Jets any kind of credit, but I really like the way that they're doing it. Right. You obviously get the 3 first-round picks back between Sauce Gardner and Quinton Williams, and then a second-round pick as well with the Quinton Williams deal. But in addition to that, you get a couple of former high picks in Adonai Mitchell and Mozzie Smith. Now, those guys may not end up amounting to anything, but if even one of those guys is able to live up to their draft status with the Jets, yeah, you're moving on from an all pro level corner and an all pro level defensive tackle, but if Mozzie or Adonai turn into decent players, plus you get those draft picks, the really good move for the Jets, and it sets them up to do whatever they want in the quarterback market, right? If let's say if they don't end up with that top pick and they are just in love with Fernando Mendoza and they want to go up and get him, they have the firepower to do that. And if they decide that either Fernando Mendoza is not the guy they want, and there's nobody else that they want, they can easily trade, just kick the can down the road with those picks and pick up even more assets for the 2027 draft for them. So, really like how they did that. I don't know if the Dolphins really had the pieces available. I think that I saw that the Colts are only paying Sauce Gardner like, I don't know, $2 million or something like that for the next year and a half, essentially, or something stupid like that.
Yeah, because his new deal rolls around next year, similarly to Jalen Waddle's.
Gotcha. Yeah. So, you know, that made Sauce Gardner a much more attractive option than basically anything the Dolphins had available. So trading him at this point, getting that kind of value was good for the Jets. Obviously bad for the Dolphins, but at the same time, I don't really have faith that the Jets aren't going to screw this rebuild up like they have every other time they've done it. So it doesn't worry me too much. But the way it looks today, I am a little bit envious of the way the Jets are setting up for the future.
Well, look, the Patriots have sort of kind of set up themselves for the future. They were not good for 5 years, and now, they built their line a little bit, built their defensive line, got some players, and then they got their quarterback and Drake May. Right now, they're catching lightning in a bottle. You could argue that they look good, but if you take a look at their DVOA from the last 20 years and their schedule, um, they have like the seventh easiest schedule of like the last 20 years, and their DVOA from where they should be is actually in the negatives. So if they were actually a good team, they should be blowing everyone out of the water. But they have the advantage because they were bad for so long, even though they placed third or fourth last year. They have decent enough players. They have a good quarterback in Drake May. And that's all it takes when previous seasons you were not good. You get a favorable schedule and you could be in contention for the playoffs. That's what the Dolphins experienced from 2021 to now. They had favorable schedules, they beat up on bad teams, and they crumbled up against good teams. And I think that's what we're going to see this year with the New England Patriots. The Dolphins can't follow that model. They need to be able to hit on these draft picks. They need to be very smart and concise with their contracts in 2026's free agency. They might have to bite the bullet this year, come 2025, end of year in 2026, but they have to look forward for 2027 and 2028 to actually build a team with a good offensive line, a good defensive line, playmakers that the quarterback can dish out to, and the quarterback cannot be injury prone. The quarterback has to be the face of the team, and the culture needs to embody the head coach, general manager, and ownership. Right now, the Dolphins have no culture. One thing is certain of all this culture talk with the Miami Dolphins in the offseason, the haters were right. The haters were absolutely right. They knew who the Dolphins were going to be in September and October. From what we heard in the media pressers, the availabilities and the offseason for media and from us, we were absolutely wrong. The Dolphins we thought were no longer what they were in the offseason. They showed who they were in September and October, and now we're going to feel these effects for the next couple of years. Thank you for my co-host, Coach, as always, being awesome. I am your other co-host, Hussam Patel. Stick with us here on Scouting the Fins, part of the 3 Yards Per Carry podcast feed, also part of the 5 Reasons Sports Network. We missed Eric today. I think he might be a little bit busy, but We will all see you all very, very soon. As always, go Fins.